speaking of Twitter, I saw something pretty hilarious, which was this. What is superstraight? This is a new sexuality that means you're only attracted to cisgender women or men. So essentially just saying that I know who all the trans people are. And also this is the I loving that they're using the Grindr colour scheme. It's a mixture of the Grindr colour scheme and the ANCAP flag here, which is weird that those two things seem to go together. Yet, now, what is this? What is this actually supposed to achieve? Now, first of all, it's just a transphobic backlash. Let's be real about what this is. This is just like trying to drive a wedge between trans people and everybody else, because straight people and cishet people, they just need some attention. They just need equal attention than the LGBTs. Like, we're getting too above our station, and they need to be included at least somehow. Yeah, I mean, like, okay, so let's talk about relationships with trans people, right? I'm going to speak on with absolute authority as the elected representative of all of the transes, right? Let's be clear, because there's a lot of discourse that happens around this, and a lot of this is kind of toxic. But let's first of all be very clear that if you have a preference for your partner to have a specific set of genitalia, that's fine. I don't get it. I really don't get it. I don't know why people are so hung up on this particular issue, but it's fine. Like, that's a thing that you can have. Like, and I think there's some people online who'd say, "Oh, if you have a genital fetish, then you're transphobic for not including that." Like, that's that. First of all, I don't think that's true, and second of all, like, you sound ridiculous. Like, even if that was true, which I could get into a conversation. I don't believe that it's true, but I could have a conversation about that. Even if you believe that it's true, and it is true, that sounds terrible, right? You're gonna win anyone over by saying that, right? But to say that you are not attracted to trans people is not only specifically transphobic, right? It's also completely in denial of reality. For one very specific reason, is that how would you know, without finding out they have a different set of genitalia than you expected, or by, actually genotyping someone, how do you know that they're trans? Like, there are some indicators that you'll have, like, I'm fucking shoulders McGee over here, like, testosterone did a fucking number on my shoulders and my hairline. Like, let's be real, I don't pass at all. But there are plenty of trans people, especially trans men, who pass very well, because once you've got a big beard, like, it's very difficult for people to read you as being assigned female at birth, right? Like, especially in a post, once you've, I mean, this is specifically with regards to, binary trans people, or, close to binary trans people who take hormonal procedures with which to transition, right? These people, a lot of these, you can't tell. They pass very well. And these people, these super straight people here, they're making the elective judgment, right, that they can tell who is and isn't trans, and that's going to be able to delineate to them who they can and can't find attractive, which it makes no sense. It has no actual, it doesn't actually have any actual practical use within the real world, considering that there are people who pass. These people, like, you've probably passed a load of different trans people in your life down the street or at the supermarket and not realised that they're trans, because, some people just pass very well. Because exactly, you don't. When you sign, I have to decide whether you're attractive, so I'm going to genotype you now, and then you're going to find out whether I find you attractive from that genotype. That's not how attraction works, right? You look at someone, you think, it's like, does this give me the hornies? Do I need bonking? That's it. That's literally it. That's how attraction works. For like people outside the A spectrum, right? If you're in the A spectrum, then you don't do sexual attraction. You maybe do romantic attraction, which may be more of a personal thing. But with regard to, general sexual attraction for people who experience it, the vast majority of it is just this person, this form of this person is something that I find attractive by looking at it and finding it out. So there are other factors that are playing to whether you find a specific person attractive based on, their own personal characteristics. But when you look at someone, you can understand, you can show someone a picture, regardless of, their sexuality, unless they're race. You can show the picture of someone, do you find this person attractive? And they will say yes or no. And that picture of someone does not include the fucking chromosomes, right? You do not know unless you have some fucking, like, transo vision whether this person is trans or not. Well, I mean, that you say that comes down to the crux of this issue. Now, is this transphobia? Yes, it is. It's specifically out there with which to antagonize trans people. Is it homophobia? Also, yes. So the reason why men are so frustrated by, like, cis straight men are frustrated by this discourse is that they feel like any attraction that they theoretically could have to trans women, even though they've probably experienced it quite a lot without knowing, they think that makes them gay. Now, if you watch the R-Traps gay video by ContraPoints, the Queen Contra, who clearly takes this issue and shows people like how attraction works. Like, in general, you're not really attracted to a gender either. Like, I'm going to do on my next stream, I'm going to do like a transgender 101 where I talk about a lot of trans concepts that people find confusing in a way, because I think a lot of people ask me for, or a lot of people ask within, progressive spaces, is there any resource that I can use to be able to understand the trans experience? And I want to try and delineate a lot of difficult concepts for people so they understand them, so they can use those points to be able to explain to other people who don't understand about the trans experience, to be able to bring people over to our side, right? Now, you're not really attracted to gender. You're attracted to like specific features, and femininity and masculinity aren't gendered. They're gendered expressions, but they are not gender. And I feel like that's mostly what attracts people. I mean, there's a certain amount of physicality that is kind of sex-based in nature that you can be attracted to, but then that can be changed by people like wearing certain type of clothes or certain type of makeup. That can change the way people perceive these kind of gendered, or even like sex-based attributes of your physical form can be changed through the way in which you express your gender, right? And people will perceive you in a different way. And some people who wouldn't find you attractive before now do find you attractive, and that some way is what makeup exists to be able to do, in that you change your appearance to make yourself look nicer, whether it be for kind of aesthetic reasons or for sexual reasons or whatever, right? So you can change these things based on people's perception of you, and that's kind of how attraction works. You don't just say this person is a woman, so I can be attracted to them. You just look at them and you find them attractive, right? This thought process doesn't come into at the start, which is why this kind of bollocks is complete nonsense, because you can't tell, right? Now, we are part of. I mean, it got kind of ratioed. There's 9,000 quote tweets and 5,000 likes. When you say we are part of LGBTQ now, it is so cringe, right? This leads me. I was wondering, well, I wonder where this came from. Superstraight? SS? This screams of poll to me. Wouldn't you know it? There it is. Making this thread before one of them hits the bump limit. Drive a wedge between expletive and other expletives. Red pill Zoomers essentially use the left tactics against them. So the reason why they're saying we are part of LGBTQ now is because they're using progressive rhetoric that is essentially now part of the Zoomer lexicon, right? They are now. I probably shouldn't show this for too long. So, like, progressive language that we speak on is now just like it's all just completely absorbed in the Zoomer lexicon, right? That's how they speak. They speak in terms of kind of materialist analysis of disadvantaged groups, so things like LGBT rights, they're all pretty up on this. I mean, obviously they're not marginalised, it's nonsense, but the reason why they're saying that they're part of the LGBTQ is to use Zoomer rhetoric that's part of the lexicon that they have been brought up into. This kind of, I hate to say social justice because that has very negative connotations, but it's part of the the discourse that they engage in, right? So that's why they're trying to say, "Oh, we're LGBTQ now," to try and people to use that rhetoric against them. See, look, use the left tactic against themselves. Call them bigots for not accepting superstraight. If they use this rhetoric and say, "Well, I'm just not attracted to trans women, and you're oppressing me for doing so," whatever. That's why they're doing this, because they're going to be able to move this rhetoric through the people who are already part of this kind of social movement, right? So it's very, very clear the tactics they are using with which to push this narrative to try and, as I said, drive a wedge between trans people and other LGBTQ groups. This is exactly what TERFs do. This is what gender critical people do. That's why LGB Alliance is the thing that exists, which, to be clear, is funded by white supremacists and has no actual LGBT people as part of it, as part of the actual movement itself, right? Because the vast majority of people who support these are all fucking straight people. All straight people who support this kind of LGB Alliance type stuff. I mean, even to the point at which, let me find my response to Candace Owens. Yeah, see, here's Candace Owens saying, I've always thought the LGB should be demand a breakup from the T because gender dysphoria has nothing to do with sexual preference, right? All of these straight people are specifically trying to drive a wedge between trans people and LGBT people, not just because they want to try and use it for political point scoring, and try and, because trans people are the issue of the day that that are riling up people in the culture war, right? But second of all, they want to specifically not have progressive have a united front on these kind of issues, and these kind of wedge driving keeps people caught up in these semantic fights, right? But it's very, very scary kind of tactics that they use to try and specifically marginalize trans people, because at the end of the day, the vast majority of the public in both the US and the UK and the Western world have accepted LGBT people now. Then the only apart from the kind of LGBTQ kind of groups and things like that, trans people are the people who are still the most maligned. And if you try and gain yourself allies from the right culturally trying to gain themselves allies of LGBT people now they've been culturally accepted against trans acceptance, is going to make it harder to accept trans people, right? So they're not what they're not saying is that LGB should separate from T, and these should be two separate groups that advocate for their political rights, right? They're not saying that they should just separate and be two separate entities. They're specifically saying LGBT people should join us against trans people. That's what they're actually saying in these particular instances, and that's why in the super straight thing they're saying we are part of LGBTQ now, because they're using that to drive a wedge, right? How come these people are with lying to prove that they are right? I mean, that's the conservative existence, right? Just peddling lies and then trying to get away with it. Or ignoring evidence that contradicts your worldview. I'll bring this great comment here. I mean, it's both the Pornhub colours, the Grindr colours, and the ANCAP flag. So, I mean, it's very, very straight of them to choose the Grindr colour scheme, I must say. But this is, again, this seems very, very dangerous. As you saw on here, Kiwi farms have picked this up as well. And, essentially they're using it. Zoomer TikTok makes new sexuality called superstraight, meaning no one's attracted to biological sex, meaning no trans people, countering the logic that the trans people are, really their gender, right? Exactly. It's like all of these online political movements, it's it's a poll site up, right? It always is. So it's very, very insidious and very, very dangerous, and we should be really, really wary about it. Obviously, this is just going to be some kind of fad that dies down. It's clearly being mocked pretty heavily across all of social media. Clearly being very heavily mocked. But this rhetoric that specifically exists to divide trans people away from the rest of the queer community, that's going to continue happening, and we need to continue holding a united front against it. A united front against it to be able to dispel these things. Otherwise, trans people are going to lose allies. Although, thankfully, for existing in kind of leftist and queer political spaces online, that doesn't really actually seem to be happening. Mostly seems to be less there are like older members of the non-trans queer community who are pretty transphobic and part of the GC movement, but the vast majority of both the GC movement, like TERFs, and the right movement, also straight people. It's all straight people feigning some level of like queer allyship to specifically attack trans people, right? Saying, well, I can't be, a traditionalist queerphobe because I'm standing for lesbian, gay, and bisexual rights against trans people, not just because I'm following some like conservative sense of anti-trans sentiment, or just be the vast majority of transphobia, which is that you just find trans people a bit icky, which is literally half of the time. That's like half of what like pervades these issues, because it's not based in reality. They don't have any statistics to back up there. They will find like some random hack science from Lisa Littman or whatever that doesn't, with no academic credibility, rather than actually look at longitudinal studies or meta-analyses of the trans existence from a scientific perspective, which clearly shows, if you actually look at it properly, that trans people's gender dysphoria is best treated with transitioning, etc., etc., etc. I mean, but as long as they say that they are fighting for LGBT people, like that's the narrative that they're going to go with, right? They're not saying we hate trans people because we want to expunge them from political and social existence, even though that's what they're trying to do. What they're using is they're using that rhetoric to be able to obfuscate that issue, right? They're saying, oh, I can't be a conservative traditionalist because I'm allying with LGBT people against trans people. Do you see what I mean? Do you see what? That's why they're trying to push this specific narrative to be able to, make. Cause, right, so for example, J.K. Rowling as a person, whenever I bring her up and say how dangerous she is, someone goes, "Well, she's just a writer. Like, she's entitled to her opinion, and even if it's wrong, then like other ideas will still beat it in the marketplace of ideas." But she has such a massive reach, and the amount of people I've seen who've said, "Well, I had no idea about what was going on with trans people until J.K. Rowling talked about it," right? And then because she was on this opinion saying this is it's a danger to women's rights and also to lesbian and gay rights, suddenly people were actually interested in what she had to say. Whereas if it was just some random conservative person being reactionary, they wouldn't have engaged with it. But now they've gone from this specific angle, people then start engaging with it. Oh, the trans people are dangerous for gay and lesbian people, despite the fact that the vast majority of the lesbian communities have unconditional support for the trans existence, right? So anyway, the super straight thing, obviously, kind of dull, kind of stupid, but hey ho, Pol and Kiwi Farms doing what they do best, which is harass queer people on the internet for no reason. And to be fair, I think that most people are mocking the super straight thing, quite rightly so, for being as ridiculous as it is. But I think it's a really good case study on the way in which that people use this kind of rhetoric to attack trans people in specific.